So I'm still working on the file from the first tutorial, where you saw how you could tumble the model using the view cube. But now I want to get you zooming and panning the model as well as just tumbling. Now you can continue to work with a shaded view using the Vis1 shader if you like, but I'm going to turn that off and instead use a hidden line view from the window display menu. And it's just an alternative way of visualizing the wireframe. Now to view the model with more control, you need to hold the Shift and Alt keys down together and keep them held down and use one of the 3 mouse buttons. And the left mouse tumbles, the middle mouse button pans the view, and the right mouse zooms the view. And with zooming, we click and drag the mouse in this diagonal to get a really responsive zoom in and zoom out. So for example, if I try to move it in this direction instead, I get a jittery result, because in fact Alias is reading these small diagonal movements from the bottom left to the top right. Now, and this is called the point of interest. It represents the center of the tumbling. And I can change it by holding down the Shift and the Alt, and then clicking on a different piece of geometry like this wheel. Just click and let go. And then when you click again to tumble, it's now centered on your new point of interest. Now when you hold down the Shift and Alt keys, you also get this menu that appears under the view cube. And this has useful tools like return to the previous view. And then down at the bottom we've got a way to bookmark a view and save it, so that when I move the view, I can always go back to that bookmarked view. And up at the top is a tool called Look At. And Look At brings all the geometry into the view, and it's similar to framing in other software. But Look At works best when you combine it with picking objects. So if I go over to the palette and use Pick Object, I can click on this front wheel, for example, to select it, and it gets highlighted in white. So now if I do a Look At, then it's the wheel that gets framed in the view. And now, even if I do a Pick Nothing to deselect the wheel, it's still framed. But what also happens with Look At is that the zooming and tumbling get adjusted to suit the size of the wheel. And this is something you'll get a feel for when you work with it, and it's really useful. So let's try again on the small badge at the front of the car. So I'll use Pick Object again, and here we get a thing called the Pick Chooser. And I just need to keep my mouse held down and move between the choices till I get the one I want. So if I do a Look At now, it will frame the badge and also make the tumbling and zooming really responsive to this small size of geometry. So a big movement on the screen only results in a small movement around the badge. But if I now try to zoom out back to the whole car, then it's just too slow and I'm having to do lots of mouse movements. So the solution is to go back to the palette and do a Pick Nothing to make sure nothing is selected. And so then doing a Look At will apply to all the geometry and readjust the view back to the full car size again. And finally there's also a view palette, which we don't use much, but it has its own Look At tool. And this is useful because it has a hotkey, which you can see if you use the right-hand mouse key on the tab title to access the text version of the palette tools. So if you like using hotkeys, then Alt-L is a really useful one. So to help you practice these tools, I've added a tip sheet into the file, which you can see if you use Object Display Visible. And this is just a canvas image, which we'd normally use for sketching. But I'm just using it here as an aide-memoire whilst you learn the keyboard and mouse keys. And you can turn it on and off using the Show menu, and just by choosing Canvas Planes. Alternatively, you can use the quick tips on the website, which list all the key combinations used in Alias, and starts with this Shift and Alt keys for viewing. So keep working on Sam's car to practice the viewing, and you might want to choose a hidden line display instead of the Vis1. If you want to see the tips page, then use Object Display Visible, and just practice using those Shift and Alt keys along with the 3 mouse buttons until it starts to become a more natural way of interacting with the model.